Hey everybody, P.A. Turner, executive producer and host of the Break It Down show with your episode today, and you're going to love this thing. So we do a lot of these spy versus spy episodes, though this is one of those, and our guest today is someone named Tracy Walder. Now, Tracy was, this is not your normal pedigree for these things. She was a cheerleader at USC with no intentions of going into federal service, the CIA, that kind of thing. And found herself, as she was getting ready to graduate, she started interviewing with the CIA and found that she liked it. And she was fascinated by all of this work. Now, Osama bin Laden hadn't done the 9/11 thing yet, but it was still, all of these things were part of what she loved, and she was drawn to it. So she goes in and she's killing it. She's literally told she's the future of the CIA. And right about 5 years in, she's operations, she's overseas a lot. She's single, but she's also operations and overseas a lot. She goes, you know what? I think I've had enough. I'm going to go do something else. And her boss looks at her like, are you crazy? Your upward trajectory is enormous. You should stay. But she doesn't. She goes to the FBI, and it doesn't go as sweetly. They get this. The FBI questions whether or not she was really in the CIA. You think about this. These are law enforcement people who can't look up the fact that she was in the CIA. Of course they can't. So they give her a hard time, and there's all kinds of problems with just a variety, and she never fits in. That's the bottom line. So she stays a little more than 5 years at the CIA and just a little more than a year at the FBI, and then she's out. Either way, along the way, she's a counterterrorism expert. She and I talk about some national defense stuff, and I just think she's such a fantastic guest and someone who's really interesting. Now, she's got a book called Unexpected Spy. You should all get it. As always, use the Amazon link. That will help us and help her. And always rate and review books when you buy them from Amazon. That's the next step, and it makes a big, big difference for those authors. Okay, one last thing before we kick off this weekend, and that's Save the Brave, savethebrave.org. Get there, do a little help. We will appreciate it. Here comes Tracy Walder.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay
This
Moore.
is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hi, this is Tracy Walder, and you're listening to The Break It Down Show.
And now, The Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
Yeah, this is one of our favorite Spy versus Spy episodes. You were, I don't know, gosh, we got to be several dozen of people in our field that do this. And you're a bit of a unique bird because you did CIA and FBI. That's interesting. And I suppose it's germane to the topic. We've had Michelle Rigby-Assad on. I don't know if you know her, but she wrote a book. And I bet you guys have very similar experiences. But thanks for coming on the show and hanging out with me on these crazy coronavirus quiet days.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, so first off, gosh, you and Michelle are so similar in like your emergence. Like she's a cheerleader, and I say this because it is sort of important. Both very attractive. You're the USC sorority girl, and it is not a common path. I mean, we don't expect that from you. Talk a little bit about your transition from being this college girl into like someone's like, I mean, how do you even know you can get into the CIA?
We have to think about it a little bit differently than we do today. I would say, today we are barraged, right, with TV shows, pop culture, you name it, what the CIA is, right, or what the FBI is. And, when I got into this originally, when I first started the whole process, this was the late 1990s. James Bond had even taken a hiatus at that time. I didn't have this whole, and really not a lot of people did, this like dream of working at the CIA, because the reality was it wasn't in pop culture and we really didn't talk about it much. So that's not really kind of what I set out. And I really didn't have any expectations for it, but I had parents who really instilled in me a love of travel. And I was really moved by Peter Arnett's interview with Osama bin Laden. So those were kind of the two influencing factors.
So a lot of people would answer that question and say, I was desperate to be in the CIA from like the time when I was a little kid and I worked my whole life because, they get to be picky. And you're sort of like, I was inspired by an interview and it wasn't really on my radar. And all of a sudden there I am. I mean, there's people that try, like they get the right degree, they learn a language, all these things. You're telling me you didn't do that stuff?
But I think therein lies the problem. If you look at like qualifications for the CIA, FBI is a little different, but if you look at the qualifications for CIA, they're extremely vague and extremely nebulous. And I think people who go in with, I'm going to check off this, and this box, I would actually say to them that's probably not what they're looking for. They're looking for people who think differently, and they don't want all one kind of major. That's not the focus of the CIA. And for me, I was a history major, but I was looking for other things that I could do with my degree. And that's kind of how this came about. So I had done some interning at different museums, different attorneys' offices, kind of things like that, just kind of trying to experience what I could do with my degree. And I decided I wanted to intern in Washington, D.C. for a senator. So I did that. And prior to doing that, though, I really became sort of disturbed by Peter Arnett's interview with Osama bin Laden. Who is this guy? Why does he hate us so much? Where is Afghanistan? Kind of all those questions. And then for him to say how much he hated Jews, and myself being a Jew at the age of I think it was 19 or 20, finally it became about me, right? He said something that, because you're so self-centered at that age. And it really made me sort of stand up and take notice. But instead of sort of hating the Middle East and hating Islam and hating the culture, I kind of did the reverse and wanted to find out more about it and more about the culture. So started taking Islam at USC. I took it. You have to take a religion course, whatever you want, is sort of a prerequisite. So I started taking it and realizing, we're not all that different. And it just really helped me understand. And I know that's kind of what you do as well with culture. And it really helped me understand them better and made me want to learn more. And I realized I couldn't do that, interning a museum or becoming an attorney. And, perhaps the CIA would allow me that ability.
What time frame is this? Is this pre 9/11?
Yes. So this is before. This would have been 98-ish, 97, 98-ish. The interview with bin Laden would have been 97.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And at that time, as you know, there weren't a lot of folks focused on Islam. They weren't focused on learning Arabic. And, on 9/11, 2001, we all kind of looked around and said, who knows about this?
Well, which is why, a lot of people, when they found out that I was assigned to the counterterrorism center, and I was working there before September 11th, I was working there on September 11th, and I was working there after September 11th. They're like, oh, wow, you must have been, the cream of the crop. And no, that's not the case. The more experienced CIA officers, the folks in the high positions, they were in sort of the Russia group or the counter narcotics center or the Latin American groups. That was really where the fight was, if you will. And so it sounds bad to say, but really counterterrorism was not, where you went for that feather on your cap, if you will, when you were there.
Yeah, for sure. Just to give some context of the time, the Cold War was over, but we were like, is it?
Well, we had Bosnia going on, right, in the early 90s. And so like those areas, and, I think the Cold War, people grew up with that pop culture, right? If you were really around in the 60s, and that's where a lot of people wanted to be, particularly those who are kind of the older subset of myself. And those would have been your more senior officers who were there at the time. Yeah. People my parents' age.
Because it literally is what they had done their whole career.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. I remember when I was in the Army, and this is in the mid-90s, we were getting rid of our long rifles, like our M16s. We weren't going to need those anymore because we weren't going to fight that kind of war. We were literally being issued M9s, 9mm pistols in our unit, because we were just, if we deployed, it was going to be on short things, and it was a different world. We really didn't know at anything. Right. So when you say that, like, CIA wasn't focused on counterterror and everything, yes, there was the terrorism threat. Yes, the Twin Towers had already been attacked once, but we weren't putting our energy into that. And also let's all keep in mind too, Central America and South America were a big problem throughout the 70s and 80s. And so we still had the same kind of thing where entire careers were built specializing in this region. And along comes Tracy, interested in Islam. And they're like, okay, if you want to go to that dead end route, go over there and sit in that room.
And it's funny because wasn't even my choice. That's just where they put me. You don't get to sort of like say, I want to be here. It doesn't really work like that there.
Yeah.
And so that is just where they put me. And really, a lot of my colleagues were the same age as I.
So, okay, 9/11 happens.
Mhm.
Tell us about that day for you and how that transforms your life, because all of a sudden now you've got a real purpose.
So I was at obviously CIA headquarters on September 11th, but the day prior to that, and this is a part of my book, I was very surprised the CIA let through, but the day prior to that, so on September 10th, I had been told the week before that about 5 of us were going to be briefed on this new program on September 10th. So we went to our meeting room, then we were briefed on it, and I remember saying, are we going to really need to use this? I was so naive, and I remember my boss kind of like leaning back in his chair and saying, "Oh no, not unless there's like a big terrorist attack. We won't need to use it." And obviously September 11th happened. I think that day is a weird memory for me, right? Like I don't know that I fully have unpacked the emotions of that day. I've unpacked like what I've seen and heard and all of that, like the physical stuff, but I don't think I've unpacked the emotions of it because like we were just so in go, 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 go mode. It was like a normal day. I came into the office, sitting down. I did not even know that the first plane had hit the World Trade Center because when you're at CIA headquarters, you really don't have access to
Right.
open internet and TV. But I had a friend who was in sort of what we call an outbuilding, just a different facility that had open internet and all of that. So he called me on my secure phone and was like, "Hey, you might want to switch on your like closed time TV." And I was like, "Why?" And he's like, "A plane hit the World Trade Center." And in my mind, and I don't know if you remember this or if any of your listeners do, but back a couple months prior to that, in maybe July, a very small passenger plane in Brooklyn it was a famous baseball player, had hit sort of, I think it was maybe subsidized housing unit or something like that. And that's where my mind went because that was my frame of reference. And I turned on my TV, obviously, just in time to see, the second plane hit. And I think at that moment, I was like, that's not this. We're definitely under attack. But, everything was quite the blur.
Yeah.
And I started working on that kind of small program, obviously, almost immediately.
Yeah, it's crazy, the whole thing. I heard the first plane hit, and I'd literally just watched a History Channel documentary on an old Army plane that had flown into a high rise in New York.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, that happens.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
the moment the second one hit, which is just moments later, I
Right.
was at work selling computers, put my headset down, got up, and I walked out of the door. I saw my boss and I said, "I've got somewhere else to be," and
Yeah.
we were all in shock. So yeah, it's a crazy day. All right. So let's back up a little bit and
Sure.
let's scope out and talk a little bit about what it's like to be an attractive female in a male big brain world. One of the things that we always say about DC, this is more for the audience than you'll get this. DC is like Hollywood for smart people. There's
I agree
everybody
with
in
that
DC is
100%.
looking at over everybody else's shoulders to figure out what connection they can make next.
Mhm.
Everybody's got an incredibly hard book to read. Everybody's working on foreign links. So like this is sort of like university never stopped, and you're all racing to try to either be relevant or to be in front of the relevant people. Does that resonate with you?
At the CIA, and I talk about this in my book, I experienced 0 issues
Okay.
being a female. FBI is obviously a whole nother story. I will say this is more of a completely superficial thing. Doesn't really have a lot to do with the CIA. But what I will say is this is can't believe I'm saying this, somewhat of an Elle Woods moment. You've seen Legally Blonde 2, the one where she's in DC. And, I remember my mom had come out with me originally to DC to sort of help me move and all of that. And she said, "Tracy, people are just like looking at you like you're from another planet." And the more I realized, like, I dressed differently. I had different color hair. I always had a smile on my face. My disposition and demeanor and look was just very different than everyone else's. But in a weird way, it didn't make me uncomfortable. I think it made me more confident, which is very strange, just from a cultural standpoint to think about. You would think it would have made me insecure. But I think for me, it made me more confident in that this is who I am. I'm not changing. the CIA treated me like an intelligent, smart person. So why do I need to change my look to be treated differently and more professionally? I mean, I think maybe there was an adjustment period of some people. I had a really good friend who's now a really good friend at the agency tell me that originally she didn't take me very seriously because of the way that I looked. And she wasn't particularly nice to me originally, but she became one of my very best friends. So I think people got to know me. They eventually took the time. So maybe if it was a difficult month or two, yeah, but I did not have any issues at all. But again, that's my lived experience.
Is that, do you think, a common experience? Have we pushed past that kind of thing, or is there still a lot of work to do there?
I don't know. Again, that's my lived experience, right? Working in the counterterrorism center, I worked with a lot of young women, and none of us ever complained about having any kind of issues. And we were all extremely close. I think we would have discussed those things. No one, at least in my group, again, I can only speak, I don't want to devalue any other woman's experience, right? I have to be careful about that. And so for me and my friends, we did not have any issues. I'd like to say they've moved. The FBI is a whole nother
Okay, well,
horrible
we'll get
ball
there in a
game,
minute.
but
Yeah.
but the CIA, mm-mm.
And then, were you going to be clandestine service? Were you going to go out into the field, or were you more of an analyst?
No, I was on the operations side.
Okay. Okay. In terms of knowing what you're doing, so okay, here's the other part of this is, okay, so they give you a fair shot coming in, which is already, that's a good thing. It's hard to know how to do these jobs, like to break in and be competent, especially again, you look at everybody around you and everybody's got all these incredible achievements, and even 5 years in, it's still like, well, I'm still brand new around here.
hmm I think because I worked in the counterterrorism center and I was there before, during, and after 9/11,
Mhm.
though I didn't work there, all that long, I was still respected. I really had no issues. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. It's totally fine. Okay, so it sounds great. And then you say, hey, why not try the FBI? Why not take somebody else's impossible dream and make it my reality?
No, I left the CIA. So I loved the CIA. I really don't have anything bad to say about it, but I don't have a political agenda. I'm just speaking from my experience.
Right.
So for me, I left the CIA because honestly, I was probably a little burned out by that point. I had traveled all over the world, done a lot of obviously really interesting things. And I realized though that being overseas was something about the CIA that was never going to change ever. And so for me, it was a hard decision because I won so many awards there and was well respected. And it's always hard to leave when you're on such good terms.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? And I remember my boss being upset, when I told her I was leaving. She's like, "You're the future of the agency. Why are you?" It's just heartbreaking, to listen to her. But I decided to leave because I didn't want to travel overseas anymore. I
Right.
was still really passionate about the counterterrorism mission. And I thought, you know what? I can go over to the FBI and work stateside and still work counterterrorism. That was kind of my plan in my head.
All right. So when you're talking about going overseas with the CIA, give us obviously you can't compromise things, but what is that like though? I mean, it sounds sexy and exciting, and why would you ever want to leave something like that? And then also, did you have someone special during this time of your life, or were you more single during that time?
No, I was pretty single. I mean, I was also in my early 20s. I wasn't really looking to,
Right.
start a serious relationship at that time. It just wasn't what I was interested in. No, it's not sexy. It's not, you have to travel in alias. At least I did in most places. So, you got to make sure your name's off your prescriptions and your dry cleaner tags and, those kinds of very mundane things that I think people sort of forget about. Also, I felt that the CIA did a really good job culturally preparing me to go to a lot of these places. They do. I don't know if they do that anymore, but they
Yeah.
would give you sort of cultural primers on where you were going and what you were doing. I would have psychological evaluations, medical evaluations, before you go. So I felt pretty well prepared to go to the places that I was going to.
When you stand out and you're the future of the CIA, that means you're pretty good at your jobs. Your boss sees something in you what made you good and what were you good at?
We always focus on the things that we're not so good at, right? So I don't know that I've ever taken the time to think about that. I had a lot of tenacity and I was very passionate, about what I was doing. I also think I was very good at relationship building with foreign services and assets and those kinds of things that I could get information from them that I needed. Also, I didn't have this humongous ego. I just was there. You tell me what you need to do and I'll do it. I'm not looking to be the boss of anything. You tell me what you need to do and I'll do it. I was also, extremely thorough. But I'd also, I was sassy sometimes. If the NSA wouldn't give me something that I needed, I would give them hell about it. And so I think, they liked that I sort of had both sides to me. I wasn't just a bull in a china shop all the time. I could be if I needed to. But then at the same time, I was very much a listener and was willing to try different things.
And relationship building with folks from other countries, why were you good at that? What do you think that stems from?
So I think that goes back to, I was reading an article about a month or so ago that the head of Mossad wrote about, and again, I don't mean to alienate, any of your listeners, because, males are great too, about why females make better operational spies or, operatives. And, we have a higher degree of empathy and our listening skills and ability to multitask are better. It's not to say that men are not good at it. They are too. We need them.
Yeah.
But both genders have different qualities, make them different sexes. And it just is what it is. And so I think for me, my listening skills were pretty good. Also, my ability to read people is really good.
Yeah. The empathy thing and the listening and having ego out of the way. I agree. I think I said this before we even started. Females at their base have a more solid foundation. Guys, we got to kind of dumb our way through the learning process and make all the mistakes.
Not necessarily, but you know what? I think women need to have more. But I think women need to have more of an ego as well, right? That's something that doesn't work for us. We need. So I think both sexes have things that they need to work on and need to, I don't want to just throw men under the bus.
No, we're not. We're just talking in for me, I had to beat my ego back and make a lot of mistakes and realize when I was injecting my ego and taking up all of the space in the conversation.
That's a good point. I think men sometimes do make more of those kinds of mistakes than women do. Right. I agree with that.
And the other thing that women have an advantage of, and the woman has to be comfortable doing this, but you can in a lot of the world, you can literally sit in a room and be invisible and be not even it's not even a lack of respect. It's a lack of existence where you're intriguing because they're like, oh, who are you?
What is this?
Right. But their default is, oh, you're still sitting there. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because if you look, obviously I'm a history person. I consider myself a bit of a historian. And if you look back at some very successful female spies, particularly if you look at the Civil War, right, and the Confederate and Union spies, a lot of those women were successful because they were viewed as invisible and people just talked right in front of them. Just such basic spy espionage tradecraft.
Right.
So you're right.
I will say this though, not every woman wants to use that very powerful lever, they feel disempowered by it. And this is just my experience from my peers. And it's frustrating, but I also have to let them do the practice in their way. So what are your thoughts there?
That's a really good question. My thoughts about that are the only way that women are going to sort of achieve equality and get ahead is if we, instead of being upset and threatened by it to the point of silence, we sort of need to speak out. And I think a lot of women, we lack the confidence, right, to be able to do that. So I think that might be the core of the issue.
Yeah. Interesting. And I appreciate you taking that on because it is touchy. And I don't mean to demean anybody else, especially females who collect, the fact that one's attractiveness is really sort of at best tertiary. It certainly it's not an indicator of your ability to do your job or not do your job. Right. But these things, you show up with these things, you show up with long blonde hair, and it's like, wait, who is this? And then there are preconceptions that internally you have to work through. Forget about externally.
That's true. I didn't think about it that way.
So let's go back to the FBI transition. So you decide that you're going to move along, FBI counterintelligence. How is that going in?
Not so good. I would say from the day I started at Quantico at the FBI Academy, it was just terrible, pretty terrible.
Why?
Well, I learned that law enforcement and intelligence are two different cultural dynamics, I guess you can say, which was shocking for me because at the CIA, I worked with a lot of military. I worked with SEAL Team 6 when I was in some other countries and had zero issues, nothing but respect from them, nothing but I mean, zero issues. And so I just assumed it would be much of the same. Why wouldn't it be? And from my very first day there, they really had an issue with how I looked. They didn't believe I worked at the CIA, which was fascinating to me, given that they had to come to CIA to conduct my background investigation. I was like, how did that work out? But okay, just constantly beating me down, putting me, during training in like the hardest situations that they possibly could, just to try to sort of wash me out. I think again that goes back to your question about, women. I think some people chose to leave, would have chosen to leave. For me, I chose to stay and sort of, I guess, try to beat them at their own game.
Okay.
But I think that took a little bit of a toll, on myself.
And was it? I mean, just okay. So these are very smart, very highly trained people who are passionate about their job. To start with, oh, she's not really from the CIA. That seems and that seems preposterous to me. And I know you're telling me the truth, so help me understand what I can't understand. That makes no sense to me. I mean,
you can verify my employment. I mean, they had to for me to write a book. So I can't understand. I will never understand, right? Why this happened. The only thing that I can think of is they didn't like how feminine I was. That's the only thing I can think of. So I'm never going to know the answer to the question of why. It is preposterous. I've come to realize that they're not as smart as I think you may think they are. So.
Yeah. Well, and I guess you're right. Like cops and spies were similar to each other, but where an FBI person thinks about the case that they're building, the spy thinks about other things.
I think we have to look at it actually differently.
Okay.
What I came to find was that particularly males there wanted the job because they wanted to carry a gun and they wanted to have a badge. And I think that speaks to the male ego a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And I think they see this feminine woman and they're like, this diminishes my macho-ness. And then, the women were pretty horrible to me too, because what had happened was I was so isolated by the men that the women were like, well, we want to fit in as well. And obviously it's overwhelmingly male, only 20% are females anyway. So it's overwhelmingly male. And I think it just it's so competitive that it just bred that situation.
Yeah, I can see that the women are already scratching and clawing, trying to inculcate and be accepted, and
Totally.
you're out there not doing those things, and so you're.
Whereas at CIA, it was, I would say, mostly 50-50. So it wasn't as, the gender difference wasn't as great.
Right. Did you enjoy the work as a counterintelligence agent, or and I'm trying to take the people part out of it, like what you were being asked to do?
That's a hard question because it was so bad and so abusive that it took. I do think the work was interesting and enjoyable, and I wasn't bad at it. But sometimes it's like it becomes so bad, it's hard to find the good, in the situation. But I did enjoy the work.
How long were you at the CIA?
Almost 5 years.
Okay. And then how long were you at the FBI?
Only a year and a half.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So you got your fill of the FBI pretty quickly. I mean,
you have to think about it from my point of view. There's only so much mental abuse that you can really take.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that I lasted a year and a half is actually pretty good. Most people, when they get to the FBI chapters in my book, are like, wow, we can't believe you didn't leave at the academy, when you were at the academy. So I'm proud of myself for hanging around as long as I gave it a good year, outside of the academy.
Yeah.
And I think that was fair, but I couldn't, it continued into my office.
Well, that's the one thing, right? Like get to the academy, get to your office and see.
That's what I kept thinking.
Right. Yeah, I know that. And
Mhm.
that makes perfect sense.
Mhm.
When did you know? Like, obviously you're
Mhm.
tough, you know how to go do these jobs and they're not easy jobs, by the way. Just so
I
you know.
loved, dumpster diving in the back of trash trucks. I actually found that very interesting. I didn't find it beneath me or anything. And, had this not occurred, I would have stayed. I did like what I was doing.
Yeah. Yeah. But when did you know that you're like, this is not going to work out? I have to move on. Hey, this is Pete A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here. And if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it. But when did you know that you're like, this is not going to work out? I have to move on.
It was interesting when my dad lost his mind. My parents are the kind of parents who are very much like, you broke your ankle, whatever, get over it, move on. Like there are not parents who are like, oh, poor baby, how can we help? They've just never, and that's not a bad thing. It's just, they're baby boomers. I'm a Gen Xer. It's how I was raised. And I like that. It's what gives me my tenacity. But I remember my boss, my supervisor, saying that I would make a good agent on my knees under his desk.
Say
and
what?
I went home. It's in my book. I went home and I told my dad, and my dad lost his damn mind.
Yeah.
And it was funny because he never does. He's a psychologist. So he's very methodical, very logical, very calm. And I had never seen him. He's like, what attorney do we need to hire?
Yeah.
I mean, he was so upset. And I think at that moment I was like, okay, this is not okay behavior. I can't do this anymore. And that was that moment. I remember that moment.
Yeah.
And then I did report it. And their solution was to move me to an office that was 2.5 hours away from where I was living.
Yeah.
And they basically blamed me for the problem.
Of course.
And
yeah.
So that's when I was like, we're good.
This is not my tribe. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm disappointed that we still have to learn these stupid lessons, and that we lose someone as tenacious and as tough as you are, because we need people in that. Although on my end, I had my moment where I'm like, I've had enough. I had it.
What was your moment?
Yeah, I'm like, I've done this. I couldn't take it anymore. I was really trying to get. I'll share with this. I was trying to get sort of back into that world, and this is what I do. I'm good at it. Let me go do it.
Mm-hmm.
And we were doing a surveillance operation, and we were getting our pre-deployment briefing. This is as a civilian in the contract world.
Right.
And the person comes in, we're in a SCIF. So a SCIF is a place where they process top secret information. Information doesn't move out of this building at all unless you're Secretary of State. But so the guy comes in the room, and we are dealing with folks from China that we're going to be, watching and keeping our eye on. And he starts briefing us on radical extremists in Germany. And I'm waiting for the connection.
What does that have to do with?
I was waiting, and there was no connection. That was the briefing. I'm like, wait, so you're telling me? And I thought he's going to talk about he's going to weave this together. He's going to talk about November 17 and, the bombings at the disco, and you must always be Nope. Just wanted to talk about radical Islamic extremists in Germany and what a threat they were. And I was like, okay, this is all, we are overdoing this was kind of how I felt. Like, I've done this. I can't take this nonsense anymore. And so that was my moment where I'm like, I'm out. I can't do this. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I totally think that makes sense. I think it was interesting because being in counterintelligence, obviously I brought my espionage background with me, but there wasn't a lot of cultural sort of training and understanding.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, so why are these guys spying? And they'd already been working this case for 3 years before I got there. And why are they spying? They're like, oh, it's for the money. And I was like, well, if it's for the money, why do they live in such a broken down house, drive a broken down car, eat off newspapers? What? I don't think it is.
Yeah.
And I mean, it turns out we found out that, they're very staunch Maoists, and they were doing this for no payment, and they wanted to sort of bring down, they had allegiance to China, which is fine. But you have to get to those motivating factors to be able to run an efficient operation, right? And if you don't know or aren't willing to know, that's a problem. And I think a lot of guys didn't want to be on that squad because they wanted to be on the gang squad or, using their gun to take, and that's not what you do in counterintelligence. And that's okay. You need both.
Yeah. Okay, so you had worked with the CIA, the FBI. Why not go to DOE and become a counterintelligence agent there? Or you've already got this federal career started. You're well into a retirement. Why leave the whole thing behind?
Because I went to college to be a high school history teacher. That was always my dream since I was in like maybe 5th or 6th grade. And so I figured at that moment, this is the best time to do that, right?
Yeah.
Why not? And so that's why I went ahead and did that, because I wanted to sort of, I guess, explore that dream.
And how has that worked out for you?
That has worked out great. I just left teaching back in January because of my book and the promotion and stuff. But I did that for about 14 years.
Yeah.
And I wrote sort of the first national security curriculum for only girls to expose them to it. And a lot of my students have work at the FBI, the CIA, Supreme Court, those kinds of things, which has been very exciting to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Why write a female curriculum then? Like, why not just write a regular curriculum? What made that important?
A lot of times careers become gender tracked, if you will, because of what we see in front of us, right?
Okay.
In terms of what pop culture, portrays, in terms of what the media portrays. And if you look at really any news network, doesn't matter their politics, anybody talking about national security, terrorism, espionage is always a male. Always. And, women think that these are not careers that are gender tracked for them. And that's why we have such a gender discrepancy just across the board. And so one of the things you can do is expose them to it, get them interested, and see if they find a place where they sort of fit in it. Not all of them become, on the operations side. I have two that are analysts right now, and that's great.
Yeah.
But the more and more we expose them to it and they see females in it, the more and more females will perhaps want to pursue this. I know it seems very simple, but I think that's the reality.
No, it's a great reality, and you're right when you think about national security and the people that are the talking heads in that field. I'm thinking about dudes, and there's no
and that's
reason
okay.
why. I mean, look at your pedigree. You were good enough to be hired twice, by federal agencies. That in and of itself is remarkable to get over.
Thank you. I never thought about that, but thank you.
Yeah, well, even if the FBI didn't believe that you were actually at the CIA, good job, cops. It was an actual reality. You actually did do those things. So it is important to have that stuff. Let's talk a little bit about national security and how you see it then. I mean, we have this administration that I guess I'll just say, like, the best way to say it is it creates a lot of its own problems, but also national security. This just turns out, Tracy, it's hard, it's hard to foreign policy. Like we had after the Soleimani killing and the stuff with Iran, I had on some statecraft guys that looked at the state side of it. And then I had on some fellow operators, a counterterrorism expert, and we talked about it. And those guys, they disagreed on what we needed to do and why we were doing it, because, and get this, they were both right. Like you can have two people sitting in two different chairs with different little tents in front of them saying, I'm in charge of this, and have them both be impassioned and absolutely correct and completely in disagreement. So what are your thoughts?
That actually is, in my opinion, one of the biggest problems. So I worked at the CIA under two very different administrations, right? Clinton and Bush.
Right.
And I liked them both in different ways. Neither of them really politicized the CIA for kind of their own personal gain. And there were people that had differences of opinions and different views. And that's okay. That's good. It's kind of like, Lincoln and his cabinet with a team of rivals, everyone that disagreed with him. But right now you have a president who is putting in people in all these positions, particularly national security, that are, only doing what he wants them to do. And I think that's a problem. Both Clinton and Bush had people with different opinions sitting at the table.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not pretty, and that's okay. But I think that's one of the biggest problems. In terms of terrorism, and I think this is probably a female thing, we look at the assassination of Soleimani, and, I'm just going to kind of set that aside,
Okay.
right? We killed someone, great. We're not looking at sort of the bigger picture. And I believe the bigger picture for terrorism is what we call failed states. I think that's a huge problem. This is why terrorism grows. If you look at, Afghanistan, that was a failed state. Therefore, the Taliban grew. If you look at Iraq, when we took out Saddam Hussein, it was a failed state. ISIS came in. You look at Sudan, that was a failed state. Bin Laden came in and said, hey, here's $20 million to build your infrastructure. Why wouldn't they do that?
Right.
Makes complete sense. And so no one talks about this, but I do feel that that's a female perspective that a female would bring to the table. And right now, look, I'm not against killing people. That's not really what I'm trying to preach here.
Right.
But what I'm saying is like, yeah, great, you killed him. It doesn't mean Iran's going to stop what they're doing. Like, yeah, great, we killed Bin Laden. It doesn't mean terrorism's going to stop. Yeah, we killed Zarqawi. It doesn't mean, and I really think sometimes we're going about this wrong.
What would be the right way? What's the Tracy doctrine?
Oh gosh, please. I think we need to be focusing on failed states. And I will tell you this, just in the research I've done about it, President Bush actually created commissions that were looking at this, which I think is actually great. Obama gave them more money to do that, gave Congress more money, gave State Department more money to figure out how we can help these regimes. Trump has cut funding to all of these programs. And I think that's a huge problem. I mean, you have Bush and Obama are not similar presidents, but the two of them, to their credit, both realized that this was a problem. And, you have a president now, and see, it's like, I'm not even trying to get political. I'm saying good things Republicans and Democrats have both done.
Right.
And I think Trump has completely cut all of their funding, so they no longer exist anymore. And so if you look at the fragile state index, because I'm sorry, that's the PC term for them. We can't call them failed, I guess, because it hurts their feelings. But
does it matter that failed state index hurt my feelings?
I guess. I don't know. But I think, and I know I sound like silly, just kind of really driving that point home. But if you truly want terrorism to stop and not exist, I think that's one way to do it. I looked at a terrorist that I got to talk to face to face when I was in a war zone. And I asked him why he became a terrorist. Totally makes sense. He said, look, at the time I was 15, both my parents abandoned me. And I mean, we're talking poverty to a level that no one in America can probably understand. He had hepatitis, no education, no food. And he's like, my country didn't provide it to me, but Al-Qaeda came in and said, hey, we'll take you to Afghanistan. We'll educate you in a madrasa. We'll teach you language. We'll give you your hepatitis medicine. I mean, why wouldn't he? If you're at that place in your life. And I think, again, it goes to that empathy factor. Men might just be like, well, whatever, he became a terrorist. You could have looked at something else to do. It's not always that easy. And different countries provide different things and different resources. And his country was on a border of becoming a failed state. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, when we look back at the Bush doctrine, we see a lot of problems. I think the doctrine is good, but the problem is the execution hasn't been great. And we all think individually, I did a great job. But when you look at the results, it's like, oh, you know what? We've really screwed this up. But, like he switched from the Clintonian reaction with F-16 model to let's go find it and hunt it out and come after it. And you're either with us or against us, unless you were the Saudis and unless you were Ireland and, all these other places that had it. But the plan for Afghanistan was brilliant, like a multinational coalition that was each going to focus on different aspects of building this state up. But we tried, and this is a political science point, but we tried nation building instead of state building. And we focused on wrong areas, and we so quickly that coalition was together, but not in alignment.
I think nation versus state building, that's key.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and so we lost our way, and we kept turning the corner because we were going to win. And I think on our side, we looked much too closely at winning the military fight instead
Mm-hmm.
of getting the government to be viable to the people in that nation. Everybody kept talking about how they would never come to get the government. And this is from a guy on the ground. The government was never valuable to the people in Iraq or Afghanistan.
Oh, I
and
agree.
right? Yeah. Like if you're not ever going to call the cops, why are we breaking our hearts trying to train
Why?
cops,
No, I agree.
So it's hard. And these and like what I said earlier, like statecraft and counterterror, these things are tough because that person, I mean, as a counterintelligence agent, I'm looking for someone who's exploitable. I don't care what the exploitation point is, right? If it's you, I'm pointing at Pete now. One of my biggest moments ever early in my career was I just gave some Bosnians some sunscreen because they couldn't get it. And they were out in the sun, rebuilding people's lives. And the guy's like, "You're an all right guy. Let me introduce you to somebody." And I was off to the races,
I agree.
So it's that easy to go the other direction, like,
Yep.
Hey, I have nefarious intent, or I want you to help me fight. You have nothing. I'll give you something.
That terrorist I told you about, he really liked oranges. I figured that out about him. So I brought him oranges and he gave me the information that I needed.
Oranges? You didn't have to give him a car?
No, I mean, it's about finding those things out about people.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about your book real quick. So obviously it captures a lot of this stuff, The Unexpected Spy. It's available on Amazon. How's it doing? What are your thoughts after going through that process?
I think it's doing really well. It's on its second printing, which is good, I guess.
Yeah.
My thoughts, writing the book gave me a lot more confidence in myself and what I was doing. I've never really talked in a lot of detail about what I was doing. And so the process for me has been, totally life-changing. But the book itself is doing really, really well.
Good. And it looks like there's a TV show in the works. Tell us about that.
Yes, Ellen Pompeo's production company has purchased the rights to it, and they're just sort of in the development stage right now. But yeah.
That's exciting for you, though.
Yeah.
I mean,
yay.
you come out of the gates. Well, this is your first book, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever not catch a huge break? Like you are so set up. FBI, CIA, write a book.
Right now, I don't know, because my book came out right at the time of really coronavirus. And so everything I've had has been obviously canceled, which makes complete sense. And I don't feel, anytime I get a little down, I think about how difficult it has to be for some people right now.
Right.
And life could be a lot worse.
So you're Tracy Walder. People can go to tracywalder.com. The book is called The Unexpected Spy. You guys should really check this out. Tracy is good people. You can also get her on Twitter at Tracy_Walder. And I know you guys will appreciate her story and what she's done. It's such a cool thing. Hey, get a chance to ask me a couple questions if you want to throw them at me.
How do you think the FBI needs to go about changing its culture? Because I don't know if you know, there's a lawsuit right now, 17 women suing them for gender discrimination. So clearly it's not over. So what do you think?
Yeah, I think the FBI is a organization in transition.
Okay.
Federal agents, people that carry badges, need to strive to be above reproach. I mean, this is not a political statement, but as someone, and I bet you will agree with me, when I see James Comey say that the Secretary Clinton didn't have intention to compromise, too bad, too late. If I do that, if you do that, we go to jail for a long time. Mm-hmm. So right at the top, you have this problem of a compromising of your integrity. And now he's in a tough position. I wouldn't want to have to be in his position. I wouldn't want to have to make that call. But there's no way on earth top secret gets out of a skiff and a crime hasn't been committed.
I agree.
There's a problem with the institutional culture there. And there is a lot of ego in the FBI. And I'm being unfair to a lot of great people in the FBI.
I agree. There are some amazing people at the FBI. I totally agree with you.
So if at top there's these problems, that obviously unhinges and untethers everybody else in that institution, because we'll just continue to use Director Comey. Whatever he thinks his institutional culture is, and let's say there's 5 key values, I'm not going to find that on the ground. And so when I go to talk to Tracy and you're like, here are the cultures, misogyny, sexism, all these other values, and I'm not putting words in your mouth, I'm just creating negative things based on what we've talked about. Then I take that back up to Director Comey and say, here's what I'm finding at the ground level. Until that person works on holding his culture accountable and measures it, because you can't just design a culture. You have to go, here's what we're going to do. And I need to hear, as the guy that helps people do this stuff, I need to hear that at the ground level, that it's actually getting through, that these folks are, you've built something that actually resonates. Otherwise, it doesn't matter what you do because you're not going to be congruent. And it's basically culture works like this, if I'm going to be very unfair and quick. To work together cross-culturally, it's going to be uncomfortable until you figure each other out and you kind of blend your cultures together. But until you understand someone's motivations, their goals, and then how they make decisions, you cannot work comfortably with them. So instead of as your SAC, I'm going to be like, what's Tracy about? Where is she going? How does she make decisions? Where does she need help? And shutting it up and making it about her, then I can't expect you to collaborate with me. It's a reverse thing. So that's what I would say about that.
That makes sense. Thank you.
But it's an interesting problem because the FBI is one of those few organizations in the nation that can literally take your freedom from you in a second, and you're pretty well screwed, whether you did anything or not. Once they lock onto you, they come after you. And I love the FBI. You can't reliably kidnap a person in this nation, because of them.
I agree. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was really fun. Everybody, check her out again, Tracy Walder. You can go to Tracy_Walder on Twitter. You can grab her there. Hey, thanks again.
Thank you, Pete.